Next up is Tim Briedis. Tim is a historian and anti-capitalist. He's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney and is researching student protest and activism in Australia after the end of free education. And Tim's going to take us through, as someone who actually came to university some years after the Bankstown occupation, wasn't actually there himself, but has pulled together quite an incredible account. So, thanks, Tim.
Cool. Can everyone hear me? Is that... Okay. Is it all good in terms of hearing me? Yep. All right. So, for the last year, I've been researching the history of student activism in Australia from 1986 to 2006. The period is marked by a narrative of the decline and fall of student radicalism compared to the halcyon days of the 60s and 70s. While it never reached the era-defining heights of that moment, my talk today aims to challenge and complicate that picture, looking at a series of particularly memorable events in the 90s in Australia. Drawing on extensive oral history, I'll do this through tracing accounts of 3 occupations: at ANU in 94, RMIT in 97, and at UWS Bankstown in 99. Although each has a distinct history in its own right, all 3 were animated by a politics of class and a critique of the enclosure of knowledge away from working class communities. With a corporate university firmly entrenched and the never-ending procession of increasing fees and cuts, this is a politics that is still very pertinent today. Far from the stereotype of campus quietitude and apathy, the occupations were, in their own terms, extremely radicalising, galvanising and exhilarating events. When we charged into the Bankstown admin building, remembered Michael Thorne, that was the moment that radicalised me. At ANU, Anthony Hayes' journal notes from the time captured the thrill of the moment. 1:30, storm into Chancellery, security and admin taken off guard, weave through ground floor of back stairs, through 3rd floor, and up front stairs and into Mill's room, chanting all the way. Feeling ecstatic, this is really happening. Mel jumps over table, then I and others follow. Room packs out. Yes, yes, yes. Hanging up the front, speeches happen. Self, the assistant to the Vice-Chancellor, comes and patronises us to unanimous derision. Still can't believe we're here, and looking to stay for a while at least. Nick off to the corner for a cig, and find Hamish there with the same idea. We hug, overwhelmed, hanging out by the windows, feeling different, better. After Bankstown had ended, even though the students had won their demands, Karen Hooper described feeling sad, yeah. I had to go back to my shitty job, to regular life. For the UK-based collective, the Free Association, these occasions can be described as moments of excess, events in which capitalist normality is broken, alternative ways of living are experimented with, and where time accelerates, creativity is amplified, and the space of what is possible expands. Everything appears to be up for grabs. Historicising these sorts of events shows how revolt can shift one's sense of what is possible, and highlight how rebellion can be joyous and fun, capturing, even if only in a small way, the lightness and joy of being a rebel. Although the university has undergone changes in the last 15 to 20 years, the circumstances that activists faced weren't too different to today, helping show what can be achieved with audacity, will, and a creative strategy. The 94 ANU campaign was triggered by a proposal to introduce a $9,000 fee for legal workshop, an effectively compulsory postgraduate course for law students that was necessary for them to be able to practice, as well as across-the-board fees of $4,000 for postgraduate students. Activists argued that this was not just a sectional attack, but one on all students, legitimising the ideas of user pays education and setting the stage for further fees. After a series of student strikes, rallies and general meetings, an 8-day occupation at ANU began after a 500-strong rally on September 15th. Admin and campus security were caught unprepared, and students simply pushed on the doors of the Chancellery, the 4-storey main admin centre on campus, and marched in en masse. The building was soon transformed into a hub of propaganda and agitation. 2 huge banners were painted and draped all the way down the side of the building. One read, "Fight Fees," the other, "Join the Occupation." A requisitions committee was established to organise food, and they soon encountered a French chef at one of the main ANU food outlets who had been involved in the May 68 student revolt, and pledged to cook as much food as possible every day and donate the extras to the occupiers. Eventually, the activists managed to hijack one of the campus library's announcement system, with one declaring just before closing, The library will be closing in 15 minutes. After leaving the library, join the student occupation in the Chancery. One aspect of the building that immediately stood out was the patriarchal design of the Chancery. Emma Robertson recalled how one of the things that we were astounded about when we went into the building was that the male bathrooms were massive and beautiful and had showers, and the female bathrooms were a pokey little toilet. That the whole building was clearly physically designed with women's secretaries in mind. Therefore, they declared a unisex toilet arrangement, with everyone able to use the men's. General meetings were set twice daily, at 10 a.m. and 5:30 p.m, held in the ANU Council's very own chamber on the top floor, and these were to be the prime decision-making spaces. Writing in Waroni in February the following year, Emily Robertson quipped eloquently, "Nothing can really match the feeling of sitting in a chair usually reserved to one's betters, feet on table, casually smoking in a cigarette in a government-designated non-smoking room. Better still, sitting in that mysterious loft at the top of the Chancery with a bunch of rowdy, grinning students instead of hemming, hawing, scheming old men. Obviously, we'd interrupted a conference. Hors d'oeuvres are passed round. Pewter jugs with wine glasses are used to serve water. There is brewed coffee. Free. No matter how cynical you are, that age-old jubilance of breaking into a posh establishment and wreaking havoc with the untouchable, unreachable higher orders just can't be denied. I sit back with my beautiful brewed coffee and smile a beatific, fat cat smile of contentment." On Sunday, September 18th, the Canberra band, the Piltdown Frauds, performed live in the Chancery, with activist Jerry Keeney claiming the Vice-Chancellor's mahogany table as a stage. For a number of the occupiers, this was one of the protest's most memorable and dramatic moments. One described it as a killer event, recalling how it was a really spectacular performance by a kind of art punk band in the Chancery, with a very eccentric and charismatic figure from this sort of surrealist band leaping onto the table with his hat made out of crazy headgear, made out of enema tubes. Just something completely out of the history of punk. It was fantastic. Yet while management may have been ill-prepared to deal with the occupation, they were quite savvy at using the negotiation process to gradually applying pressure upon them. By the middle of the second week, admin had moved to an offer of a review committee for the fees, but the actual mechanism for making a decision about them, the General Council, would remain unchanged, with one student and an array of businessmen, politicians and representatives of management. This was overwhelmingly rejected by the occupation. Yet the offer of a review found a sympathetic audience in the presidents of the three student associations on campus. In order to take up a review offer, management insisted that they would have to withdraw from the occupation. On the evening of Wednesday 21st, the presidents resigned, and soon after, the university called the police. Using a sledgehammer, they battered down the unlocked back door and entered the building, and the activists marched out without arrests. The campaign continued strongly for another month. A second Chancery occupation in October was much more quickly dealt with, resulting in nearly 30 student arrests. The eventual outcome was mixed. The across-the-board postgraduate fees were scrapped, and while the $9,000 legal workshop fee was reduced to $5,000, it came into place the following year. The RMIT occupation of '97 was an even longer affair, lasting 19 days from August to September. Coming amidst a wave of protests in response to the implementation of upfront fees, it was one of over a dozen student occupations across Australia that year. As a result, the university expected that an occupation could be on the cards, so the activists had to carefully plan how to get in. It needed to be central enough to the university that occupying would have an impact, yet not too prominent, because they thought that at places like the main admin building, security would be too tight to get in. Eventually they settled on the university's Department of Finance and Strategic Planning, on the 5th floor of K House on Swanston Street, and planned a rally that would go past it, but not supposed to end there to avoid security attention. Everything went smoothly. On the day of the rally, the building was unprotected, and the students rushed up the stairs when they went past it, with RMIT union staff members handing out backpacks stuffed with water bottles and food as they went in. It soon turned into a siege-style occupation, in which the activists inside were prevented from leaving and coming back by police, gradually whittling down the occupiers to a smaller core who were prepared to stay 24/7. Ultimately, it mostly failed, with the occupiers agreeing to a non-binding referendum on upfront fees at the university in exchange for withdrawing. They won the referendum overwhelmingly, but this was then ignored. Both the confined nature and end result of the occupation tended to give a slightly different slant to former activist reflections. Instead, they emphasised the craziness of the period to a greater extent. For instance, Andrea Maximovich recalled how we didn't have that much alcohol, but there was a lot of dope smoking. I think that was partly the reason why at some point I just thought, if we don't get out of here, this is going to get really messy. Because some people were stoned the whole day, others were stoned at night. I just thought, this could get a bit strange. Yet the heady atmosphere of the occupation still inspired several moments of creativity. Although there was a telephone in K House, not many people had mobile phones, so there was a need for more of them inside. The police allowed food and clothing in, but prevented anything else. So the activists chose a clandestine route instead. They dismantled the mobile phone and charger and put them in a cake and breakfast cereal. The food was sent up through the pulley system, and the plan went off without a hitch. Similarly, Mars Cameron remembered how someone had the idea of projecting from the street up into the opposite wall onto RMIT, so the occupiers could see it from a window, a movie. So I don't know if it was Berkeley in the 60s or Malcolm X or something, but we watched a movie. It wasn't a completely flat surface, but there you had the rain falling in Swanston Street, the lights, the trams, and all this sort of stuff. And in this flickering film, the people watching from the window, the people down below. It was kind of magic. The 99 Bankstown occupation lasted 14 days and was perhaps the most successful of the three, winning its demands more or less entirely. They focused on improving basic material conditions at the university, such as around security, better computers and printing, free car parking, and jobs for casual teachers. The campaign was kick-started by surveying students around campus around what they thought the main problems at uni were, to form a log of claims. This democratic element was important in drawing students into the protests, and Michael Thorne recalled that the log of claims was just people getting blank sheets and filling out what they hated about the uni, what was getting in the way of their studies. The important thing was that it was all pulled together, and that it was done justice. Once pulled together, you have a log of claims that was expressing exactly what people were saying. You could very easily change it around, change the wording, and make it sound different. I think because of that, students at Bankstown felt a sense of ownership over the action and the log of claims campaign. When the occupation started, a culture of tremendous political excitement again prevailed. The main university sign at the entrance to campus was soon redecorated to say, UWS MacArthur, under student control. Stickers declaring, against staff cuts, join the occupation. Students United will never be defeated. And later, you won't believe how many people I've slept with in the last week, began to proliferate. A website was set up that took particular glee at mocking university management, featuring a picture of the Vice-Chancellor that you could click on and he would say things like, I am Conan the Destroyer, and I will crush you. This sense of fun continued throughout the occupation. Julie Sloggett recalled how, the night before the occupation started, I don't know why, I'd gone home and I brought these Winnie the Pooh hats. So there was a Tigger hat, a Piglet hat, and a Winnie the Pooh hat. And at one point, whoever was the speaker had to wear the Piglet hat. So there'd be these really intense, full-on political conversations going on, but the person would be wearing a Piglet hat. So it kind of took the seriousness away a little bit. In an email to the National Broad Left list, Richard Martino vividly articulated the sense of collectivity and wide community support, emphasising how, perhaps the most important aspect of our occupation, however, is that the SRC has never attempted to take the credit, overrun the speaking lists, speak the most at rallies, do all the media, and most importantly, do all the important stuff. Students have taken control. Not the SRC or union or association, but students. The only way people can ever become empowered is by giving them the resources to empower themselves. The support that we have gotten has been fantastic. Local businesses have sent money, food, and letters of support. One student tonight that we had never seen before dropped off 4 pizzas out of his own pocket. Heads of departments have brought us fruit platters and taken collections within the departments. This is just fucking massive. The collective spirit has never dwindled. If someone falls asleep on the floor, they have a pillow under their head and a blanket on them in 5 seconds flat. Everyone wants to be involved and help where they can. These sort of experiences led to a deep radicalisation for some of those involved. Amy McMurtry, for instance, remembered one day sitting there with a few people and just being like, oh my God, everything's fucked. And they were like, yeah, we know. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Things are really, really bad. It was just like suddenly my mind was exploding and everything was kind of connected. I just remember that time as this deep kind of opening of understanding the world in a different way that I never had. Following on from this, a common thread in my research has been that, win or lose, this feeling of excess associated with the occupation leaves a mark well beyond the immediate event. In 2001, Bankstown saw a second successful 52-day occupation of Gullengalia, the Aboriginal education space at uni, attributed in part to the inspiration given by the 99 occupation. In a more subtle and subterranean way, both RMIT and ANU activists argued that the sort of connections built up during their occupations helped facilitate ongoing organising around environmental protests, later student and refugee organising, and the anti-capitalist summit protests of the early 2000s. Yet at the same time, it's important to avoid falsely romanticising these events. Meeting minutes at ANU, for instance, point to occasions when sexual harassment occurred, while some activists at Bankstown argue that an informal leadership ran counter to a democratic culture. Highlighting and acknowledging these problems, perhaps, can help us do better in the future. Yet simultaneously, the fear of imperfection should not act as a barrier. We should not wait for an entirely liberated space that can never come. Inevitably, these sorts of events pose questions about lessons. What tactics and strategies can be teased out that might be relevant to our struggles today? While we should be wary about the dangers of uncritically replicating what worked in the past, neglecting the particular circumstances that made these approaches possible, history can perhaps provide a usable archive for radicals. Against a spontaneous conception of militancy, all three case studies do suggest the importance of some degree of planning. At ANU, the occupation was a culmination of a gradual escalation of struggle, with a lengthy series of less militant protests before the occupation, making the tactic seem logical and natural. More comically, at RMIT, the occupiers learnt lessons from an earlier Melbourne uni occupation that proceeded without access to toilets. As a result, they scouted for a building that would avoid this problem, and found one furnished with not just toilets, but a refrigerator, showers, 3 photocopiers, and 20 computers. Secondly, they also highlight that a strong recent tradition of radicalism isn't necessarily a prerequisite for success. All three occupations, in fact, occurred at campuses with only a relatively small amount of recent activity. If anything, this helped the activists, as the uni administration tended to be disorientated and surprised. There was a policy void that they could exploit. These histories shouldn't be interpreted as an ultra-left call to occupy whenever, wherever. They point to what can be accomplished, not necessarily to what we should do. But the energy gained from the ecstatic, euphoric atmosphere shouldn't be forgotten as well. The creation and consolidation of communities of dissent helped sustain the occupations themselves. The experience of excess had a real, tangible impact, keeping up morale during the lengthy periods inside. At ANU, Hayes recalled how, "I lived and breathed the occupation. I remember at one point, sort of like sleeping and waking up, and I was asleep on one of the benches of the Mills room, and I sat up, I looked around, and it was a meeting, and I put my hand up. And I'd been awake for about 10 seconds at that point, and I just thought that I would contribute because that's what you did. To me, this was like a utopia, having sort of arguments and debates about stuff, about what we needed to do, and whether or not we could make leaflets or get bands to play or whatever." It's important to be honest about failure, and this is a history set amidst a series of major defeats for students and student movements in the course of the last 30 years. Yet in this context, moments that illuminate how rebellion can be joyous, inspiring and fun seem even more important to remember, both as history in its own terms and as a way of pointing towards political possibility. Utopian dreams in the present can be sparked by memories of the past. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tim.